Michael, I mean, it is quite a complicating setup that you appeal to the Court of Appeal to appeal against its own judgment. But the government does have a democratic mandate to begin the Rwanda removals. Surely they should be allowed to get on with them.
Yes, I mean, so it goes from the High Court to the Court of Appeal and then to the Supreme Court. So presumably this will be the final decision, I would imagine. I suppose in terms of the democratic point, the government is, well, Parliament is sovereign, I suppose. But the courts are there to make sure that all of the laws we've signed up to are consistent. Now, Parliament has decided that we will be part of the European Convention on Human Rights. They could decide to leave it. That would put us in the same group only as Greece, who left it after they suspended democracy in the 1960s, and there was a military junta, and Russia after it entered Ukraine. So it's not necessarily company we want to be keeping. But if MPs wanted to, they could leave it, and then obviously the court would say, fine, go ahead, because that's what they think the Rwanda policy is breaching. Now, potentially the Supreme Court will decide that actually Rwanda is a safe enough country. Obviously, the High Court made one decision. It was overturned by the Court of Appeal. So potentially there's differing views within the judiciary. So it could be overturned, but either way, it doesn't seem to me to really impinge on democracy in this country.
And Rafe, the Supreme Court does seem to have moved away from the highest point of judicial activism under Baroness Hale when she got herself involved in things which were clearly the responsibility of the executive.
Yes, but this really does play to the government's hands here, because they can then portray themselves as fighting for the rights of the people, being thwarted by the House of Lords and by the judiciary. I'm trying to get excited about this being allowed, but at the end of the day, I view this as a great distraction. You know, the Rwanda policy is simply designed just before an election comes around to convince the British public that the government is actually getting serious, finally. They've had 13 years to get serious. The Rwanda plan is akin to trying to empty a swimming pool with a teaspoon. There's a whole raft of policies that could easily have been enacted by this government. Denmark has done it successfully. Germany has now got temporary visas for asylum seekers so that they know that they won't be staying in Denmark. They've more than reduced by 3 times the number of asylum seekers there, simply by reducing benefits by 50%, by confiscating assets over £1,000. The only thing you have to do, really, is make Britain less attractive than France. And the government has had 13 years to do this. Crack down on the black markets.
England's always more attractive than France for all sorts of reasons. But in terms of your point that, yes, of course, the government could withdraw from the European Convention, but on the prisoner voting rights, it eventually had a negotiation with the Council of Europe so that both sides accepted some element of compromise, that we could do effectively what we wanted, but we accepted that the court had some authority. Do you think there's something along those lines that can be done so that this policy can be implemented in a way that leaves everybody happy?
I mean, I suppose that's possible. That'll be up to the government to have a negotiation with an international body. I suppose to push back slightly on where you're coming from there, I do think there is this misleading notion which is often put out, which is to say that the UK is a real soft touch on migrants and we're incredibly attractive and everyone wants to come here. Now, I think what that avoids is actually that there's almost double the number of asylum applications in France as there are here. So the issue for me is, if you want to get tough on illegal migration, you have to be willing to take your fair share of asylum seekers in the first place. And at the moment, actually, we take relatively very few asylum seekers compared to other European countries. So I do think there's potentially a bit of a misleading image which being put forward.
If those asylum seekers are legitimate.